If love meant defying everything you were raised to believe, your family, your legacy, your destiny, would you still choose it? Welcome to Happiness of Love, your daily dose of K-dramas. Get ready to fall in love with unforgettable stories. Can you tell us where are you listening from? Torrential rain fell from the gray sky, lightning illuminated the city with piercing flashes of light, reflecting the storm in Thomas Kang's heart. He was standing atop the gleaming Kong Group building, watching the hazy horizon, the weight of responsibility crushing him. The arranged marriage with Seo Hannah was his destiny, a burden he accepted but would never accept. As the raindrops ran down his skin, a part of him longed for freedom, for a burst of color in his gray, well-ordered life. He would never have imagined that this explosion was about to happen. At the Kong Foundation, a vibrant art and culture gallery, Violet Choi was about to open a new exhibition, her heart pounding with excitement and anticipation. The smell of fresh paint and polished wood filled the air around her as she tidied up the latest work. Each piece told an emotional story, an echo of the past, as well as his own life. She always dreamed of the freedom to express what she loved, but the shadow of the powerful Kong clan over her was undeniable. Ultimately, she wondered if her passion for art would keep her in check or if the loneliness of her life would overcome her. When Thomas and Violet met for the first time during exhibition preparation, the connection between them was instant and undeniable. He had entered the art space more as a redeemer seeking inspiration than as the heir everyone knew. Violet, with her hair down and her eyes sparkling with excitement, made her aura seem almost magical. He remembered how her breathing felt lighter, as if the simple act of being around her made the pressure of the world ease a little. As they talked, he remembered that the rigidity he had always endured could, in fact, be broken. She commented on the beauty of a particular painting, a cry amidst the chaos of life, and her soft voice resonated with a weight of truth he had never experienced before. Thomas, distracted by the thoughts that tried to suffocate him, couldn't contain a slight smile. They were small, ordinary interactions, but in their elite lives, these moments were rare gems, and he was beginning to feel attracted to the way Violet challenged his beliefs, making him question his role and his desires. Meanwhile, Seo Hannah watched from afar, her cold expression concealing a whirlwind of emotions. She knew of Thomas' attraction to Violet and was not going to allow anything or anyone to come between her and the power she craved. The shadow play had just begun, and the truth was that both Thomas and Violet were about to discover that love could be both a blessing and a curse in a world where destinies were already set. And throughout the afternoon, as the rain continued to fall, something unsustainable was building in the air, an electrifying tension that challenged the status quo. The first touch of hands, even if accidental, caused the two to electrocute each other. He didn't know that with that simple gesture, the invisible line between duty and desire was about to be crossed. Deep down, they knew they were doing something forbidden, but the adrenaline accentuated the impulse to delve into this overwhelming feeling, even if fate tried to separate them. Thus, Thomas and Violet wavered between dreams of freedom and the chains of the past that bound them, preparing themselves for the emotional turmoil that was to come. Both were about to embark on a path full of impossibilities and discoveries, where the real challenge would not only be facing the world around them, but fighting themselves and their deepest fears. The real battle for freedom had begun. Violet Choi always dreamed of working in art, and the call to restore the old painting in the imposing Kong mansion was like a ticket to a distant and unknown world, where the pains and joys of life mixed with the color palette of the painting. Light filters through the tall windows, bathing the room in a golden glow that enhances the textures of the painting, a masterpiece that she knows needs a delicate touch to restore to its former glory. As he worked, his fingers slid over the screen, awakening long-buried feelings and stories, but the sounds of the environment soon became secondary. The smell of polished wood and artistic solvents penetrates her senses, a scent that brings out not only her passion for art, but also the desire for liberation that she secretly harbors. It was in this almost magical space that she realized she was being watched. Thomas Kong was there, leaning against the door, his expression neutral, but his deep blue eyes shone with curiosity and something else. He introduced himself as a simple visitor, and Violet, unaware of the true identity of the man in front of her, felt at ease as if she were talking to an old acquaintance. His carefree charm, his almost playful speech, made her relax. As Thomas questioned him about his work, his voice sounded soft and full of genuine interest. She responded by saying that each brushstroke reveals a piece of history, a connection to the souls that came before her. At that moment, the weight of the outside world disappeared, and what remained was an undeniable connection, an invisible thread that united them in that elegant environment full of memories. They stared at each other in moments of comfortable silence, and the tension in the air was palpable, like an electric current that seemed to dance between them. When Thomas smiled, there was a sparkle in his eyes that made Violet's heart quicken, a slight twinge of overwhelming attraction that both surprised and intrigued her. Time passed without them noticing, and the first goodbye was difficult. There was something else in the air, an echo of a future that could be. Days later, fate brought them together again at a gala event for the Kong family, where the sparkle of long dresses and the clinking of glasses matched the restrained laughter, but the real story was about to happen behind the scenes. When Thomas spotted Violet in the crowd, what was once curiosity turned into an irresistible impulse, and he felt he needed to get closer to her. Like a magnet, their gazes met, and instant recognition enveloped them in an indisputable aura. And it was there, amid elegant guests and curious looks, that Thomas finally told Violet who he really was. The revelation was like a cold wave on a hot day, making her heart throb with a mixture of shock and awe. She responded by saying that she could never imagine that the man who had earned her respect and admiration in the mansion was none other than the heir of the Kong group. His smile reassured her, but the tension of the revelation remained in the air. However, even in the face of concern about the consequences, the attraction between them continued to grow like a flower blooming in the cracks of cold concrete, and, from that moment on, their lives would never be the same again. What began as a simple chance encounter would now become a secret dance between two worlds, where the true dilemma lay deeper than the eyes could see, and the resolve to defy fate was about to be tested. In the next part, we will explore the beginning of this forbidden romance, where the two characters will have to deal with their growing feelings and the difficulties of a love in the shadows. Morning fog delicately enveloped the city, carpets of shadows dancing beneath the pale lights of dawn as Violet Choi entered the modern Kong Foundation building, her heart pulsing with the anticipation of a new day filled with new opportunities. With her hands dipped in her coat pocket and a shy smile lighting up her face, she felt a mixture of excitement and anxiety, aware that her life was about to change in ways she could not predict. The aroma of fresh coffee permeated the air, and while her coworkers as they hurried past, exchanging smiles and greetings, Violet found a break in her routine to think about Thomas Kong, the heir to the financial empire who had become fundamental in her life in a way she never dared to imagine. But that day, as she put her bag on the table and opened her laptop, the screen lit up a piece of news that hit her heart like a stone thrown into the calm water of her existence. Thomas was engaged, and the bride was Seo Hannah, the daughter of the influential politician, a union he was always forced to accept by family obligations. The title of the article resonated in her mind, and the words seemed to dance, mocking her, making her stomach turn. She couldn't understand how things had gotten to this point. How could a simple touch of their hands create such a strong bond while the weight of an arranged commitment hung over Thomas? Violet remembered the promises whispered between them, the vows that love could overcome any barrier, but now, those promises sounded empty and distant. Feeling betrayed in a way she had never felt before, Violet left the table, her mind clouding as each step took her away from what she once considered to be the greatest moment of her life. She should walk away, she knew that, for love often required sacrifices, and those sacrifices, she thought as she walked, should include him. But as the days passed, Thomas didn't let her go easily. He sought every moment between high society events to see her, begging her to listen to him, his eyes burning with the intensity of his feelings. He said he didn't love Seo Hannah, that he had fought against pressure from his family, but Violet only felt the pain of what they had built and which was now about to fall apart. Their meetings became infiltrated with urgency, secret meetings in local coffee shops, furtive glances at gala events, coded messages that passed from one to another like a dangerous game. He told her that he would find a solution, that the chains that kept him trapped didn't define who he truly was, but every whispered word from him seemed more like an embarrassingly empty promise in the shadows of the reality that surrounded them. As Thomas moved through high society, he maintained a smile that did not show the whirlwind of emotion and internal struggle that was unfolding within him. He watched Violet at every gala, her dress flowing like a dream as his eyes searched for her, unable to avoid the connection that burned between them. He couldn't share the truth about his engagement to Seo Hannah as it had always been more than a mere arrangement for him. The belief that they could defy fate seemed to be fading, but he wouldn't give up on it so easily. The warmth of their furtive glances turned into a restless heat that pulsed between their bodies, and amidst the subtle music that filled the atmosphere, they desperately wanted to believe that they could defy expectations and secrets, even as a storm approached with irresistible force. What had begun as a forbidden romance became a delicate dance between hope and reality, a tenuous thread that held them together and at the same time threatened them. Now, after each encounter, the whispers of doubt and fear of loss became more deafening. And with each challenge that arose, the pressure increased, and the uncertainty about the future left them closer, but also further away from their own destinies. In the next part, we will explore the introduction of an emotional challenge, where a long-held secret will begin to affect the dynamics of Thomas and Violet's relationship, revealing crucial details that will test the strength of their love. Thomas Kong moved through the elegant lobby of the imposing building that housed the Kong Group, his heart heavy under the weight of a future he didn't choose. The bright lights and whispers of the executives around him seemed distant and muffled, as if the life he led was at odds with what he truly wanted. An arranged marriage with CEO Hannah loomed, and the idea of being just another pawn in the intricate chess game of politics and power made him uneasy. However, all that changed when his attention turned to the fresh and vibrant air of Violet Choi, who spent day after day among the works of art, breathing passion and authenticity in every movement. Violet, with her flowing hair and eyes that sparkled like the pigments of a freshly made painting, was a storm in his organized life, defying the superficiality that surrounded his existence. It deepened, becoming a sweet whisper of hope amid the coldness of a world that demanded control and commitment. In secret meetings, away from the inquisitive looks and family obligations that hovered like a dark cloud, Thomas felt alive for the first time. Conversations about art and dreams turned into shared laughter, and he loved listening to Violet talk about her work as a restorer, her delicate fingers running over the surfaces of the works, bringing back to life what should only be in memories. He told her that every time he saw her, he felt a new purpose blossom in his heart, and she responded with a smile that brightened his world, even in the darkest moments. However, the joy of these clandestine moments was constantly overshadowed by the fear of what might happen if they were discovered. The shadows of tradition and family expectations hung over them, and Violet, wanting to protect the possibility of a future, tried to resist. However, Thomas became increasingly irresistible, and the connection they shared was intense and difficult to ignore. On one of their dates, as they were walking in the soft evening light, he took her hand, leading her to a small cafe tucked away on a quiet street. Watching her take a sip of coffee, he expressed with a dreamy look that he had never imagined experiencing something so profound. Violet, feeling her heart racing, evoked a forbidden desire, responding that perhaps they were destined to continue meeting in the shadows unless fate decided it was time to put an end to it. However, their happiness would soon become vulnerable when Min Jun, Thomas's brother, discovered their steamy and forbidden romance. He watched their every gesture, as if he were a juror in a court where the evidence of betrayal was on display. With a serious look and a worried expression, Min Jun confronted Thomas, warning him that this could not only ruin their lives, but also affect the family legacy. He warned that a scandal at this level could destroy them both, and the responsibility of maintaining the perfect family image weighed even more heavily on Thomas' shoulders. The conversation turned into a storm of emotions, with Thomas trying to justify his love, while Min Jun expressed his fear that the brothers were treading a dangerous path of no return. With each word, guilt coiled tighter around Thomas's heart, challenging his vision of a future with Violet as he pondered his life beyond the walls of fortune and fame. With the weight of Min Jun's warnings in mind, Thomas returned to the family home, his emotions swinging between undeniable love and the responsibility that his origins imposed on him. Now, Thomas's heart was divided between the desire to experience true love and the need to follow the paths that were laid out for him. The fear of losing Violet grew ever greater, coupled with the fear that what began as a secret involvement could turn into a scandal that would trigger devastating consequences. As the days passed, the pressure on them increased, as if a limited time was being marked by an increasing silence of secrets and fears. Their relationship, pulsing between moments of love and crisis, became a delicate dance between triumph and collapse, leaving Thomas to question what really mattered. When life's tumultuous lies surrounded him, he had to decide whether he would be brave enough to defy the world and fight for Violet, or whether he would allow the shadows of the past to consume them forever. The next part of the story will be dedicated to introducing the emotional challenges that will further test Thomas and Violet's relationship. Sunlight filtered through the silk curtains of the Kong Foundation office, creating a pattern of dancing shadows on the marble floor. Thomas Kong sat at his desk, fingers intertwined, losing himself in thoughts that distanced him from the reality around him. He maintained a serious expression, typical of someone accustomed to dealing with relentless challenges, but the truth was that his mind revolved around Violet Choi, the woman who increasingly became a reflection of everything he desired. Her laughter still echoed in his ears, and every time he saw her, his heart beat faster. It wasn't just an attraction, it was as if she had unlocked a part of him that he himself didn't know. Yet, he was aware that this relationship was a tightrope he was walking on, with a painful fall lurking beneath. To protect. She watched the way Thomas interacted with Violet, how his gaze warmed and his posture relaxed in her presence. Hannah, daughter of an influential politician and used to seeing what was beneath the surface, didn't take long to realize what was happening and decided to act. She approached her father with concern that was far from genuine, stating that Thomas might be getting into something inappropriate and that he should know. Hannah's father, a man of great power and influence, was not fooled by the frame of innocence that his daughter was trying to build. So, he decided to hire a private investigator to follow Thomas and discover his interactions with Violet. From that moment on, the tension between them all would begin to intensify. At the same time, as shadows gathered at her door, Violet found herself in her small art gallery, admiring one of her most recent restorations, an ancient painting of the muse that exuded an air of melancholy. The smell of solvent was still in the air when the peaceful atmosphere was abruptly broken by an anonymous message on his cell phone. The message, raw and threatening, told her to stay away from Thomas, insinuating that there were terrible secrets connecting their families. Violet's heart raced, her adrenaline soared, and her stomach tightened as if a predator was watching from afar. The walls, which were once filled with an optimistic outlook, now became prisons of uncertainty. A part of her wanted to ignore the threat, but the other, more realistic part of her mind whispered that perhaps there was some truth in the message. Feeling like the world was closing in around her, Violet sought solace in the memories she had of Thomas, in his whispered promises during the clandestine meetings that now seemed so far away. Even in the face of fear, a flash of courage lit inside her, and she decided that she would not allow lies to obscure what she had built with Thomas. Meanwhile, in a far corner of the city, tension between Thomas and his father intensified. The Kong Group patriarch approached Thomas with a stern look, his words as heavy as lead. "You know she will never be accepted into our family," he said. Each syllable was a stab in his heart. The phrase resounded in the air, standing between them like a ghost that could never be exorcised. Thomas felt the pressure increase. He was between family obligation and love that grew more and more. At the same time, there was a trace of despair in his mind, an internal struggle that could put him on a path of no return. Just when he was about to respond, a shadow fell over the relationship that had taken so long to emerge. Thus, they would face a tangle of lies, blackmail, and the expectations that tradition imposed on them. This crisis would become the breaking point, where choices would need to be made. What would they choose? Defy the full weight of history or bow to the pressure that surrounded them? In the next part, the focus will be on the development of the relationship between Thomas and Violet, alternating moments of romance, humor, and tension. Thomas Kong wore a stern expression as he oversaw the final preparations for the Kong Foundation's art exhibition, an event that would not only solidify his position in society but also keep him abreast of his family's expectations. The spotlight shone on him in the world of glamour, criticism, and social interactions, but his mind was distant, lost in the expressive eyes of Violet Choi, the art restorer who brought a breath of life into his drab world. She told him about the work she restored in such an excited tone that Thomas couldn't help but believe she handled art as if it were life. The delicate touch of her hands when restoring a painting, showing skill and passion, was the same intensity that her words conveyed when, with a glimmer of hope, she said that each work. It had a history, a memory that needed to be preserved. But in those moments when their eyes met, and their hands almost touched, diffuse and whispering, there was a mystery, almost like a symphony of unspeakable feelings that hung in the air, as if the atmosphere itself was permeated with something stronger than passion, a destiny that had brought them together. However, a shadow hung over them, and in his ignorance, Thomas could never imagine that what was unfolding behind the scenes was more devastating than any scandal he could manage, a secret buried in their family's memories, capable of ruining everything. On a gray afternoon, when heavy clouds threatened to descend over the city, Violet found her mother's old diary in a dusty corner of her house. With curiosity burning, she opened the pages yellowed with age and the blue ink began to dance before her eyes. In the records, her mother spoke about a forbidden love that had marked her youth and, with a knot in her stomach, Violet realized that the descriptions referred to Thomas's father. The words became like a terrifying echo, and her thoughts swirled like a whirlwind. Am I his daughter? Her stomach turned as her mind tried to make sense of the truth that surrounded her. The world he lived in, full of promise and laughter, instantly turned into a trap, and the weight of the love that had blossomed last spring turned to ashes and rubble. Wringing her sweaty hands, she decided the best thing to do was to get away from Thomas. What could have been a glorious love now became a forbidden bond, an incestuous relationship that could not be tolerated. Sitting at the table in her small apartment, the morning light filtering through the windows, Violet wrote a message, fighting the tears that insisted on rolling down her cheeks as she said goodbye, unaware that each word cut deeper than any dagger. Thomas, we need to talk. I can't go down this path any longer, it's too dangerous. When they finally met at the elegant cafe where they had shared laughter and knowing glances, the air was thick with the sound of clinking cups and the aromas of fresh coffee. Thomas arrived, with the expression of someone who was expecting a festive moment, but when he looked at Violet's pale face, his heart sank. She didn't seem like the radiant art restorer he knew. She had become the personification of despair. What is happening? Are you well? He said, worried, but Violet just shook her head, trying to gain courage. With a trembling voice, she finally revealed the terrifying truth, the words coming out in a broken whisper, my mother had an affair, and I could be your sister. The silence that followed was deafening. Thomas' hands shook slightly, the world around him crumbling as his heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. He tried to look for some words, something that could rescue reality from the abyss, but the lies and secrets tied his tongue. Violet stood up, tears streaming down her face, and left, her heart screaming to stay, but her mind ordering her to leave before it was too late. Then, in a cruel and irrational moment, Thomas Kong, the heir, was left alone at the breakfast table, surrounded by the memories of a love that was now unattainable to him, the shadows of the past closing in on him, dissolving all the hopes and whispered promises he had once believed he possessed. In the next part, we will develop the relationship between Thomas and Violet, as they try to deal with the emotional and external conflicts that arise after discovering the secret. Thomas Kong walked through the Kong Foundation's lush gallery, where the artworks were perfectly arranged in a soft light that highlighted their vibrant colors. It was a place that had always been a part of his life, but that day it seemed different, as if the walls were silent witnesses to a secret love. Thomas's heart beat wildly as he looked at Violet Choi, the art restorer whose presence illuminated more than any famous sculpture. She moved with grace between the paintings, her delicate fingers touching the edges of a painting as if to preserve not just the painting, but the very history it carried. The two shared whispered conversations about invisible contaminants and restoration techniques that seemed far beyond the everyday, but these conversations were also a dance, a careful step into a dangerous terrain of submerged emotions. However, this momentary charm would soon be overshadowed by the heavy clouds of family obligations. As he gazed into Violet's brown eyes, reflecting the light so beautifully, he couldn't help but think about what was behind his feelings, about the arranged marriage with Seo Hannah that waited for him like an indistinct shadow. When the two were together, nothing else mattered. It was as if the entire world had disappeared, but reality was about to enter the scene. The bond between them grew silently in the weeks that passed, and with each exchange of glances, Thomas wondered if he could free himself from his invisible chains. But outside forces were gathering, and as their love intensified, the weight of family expectations became almost unbearable. He knew he would have to face his father sooner or later, and when he did, he had no idea the consequences would be so devastating. Facing his father in the family patriarch's elegant office, Thomas felt small compared to the coldness that emanated from that imposing figure. He said he knew the rumors about Violet were circulating, and although his voice was consumed with anger, he wanted to understand the source of those lies. Thomas's father, however, remained impassive, and even as he confirmed that he had spread such stories to drive them away, he hid the truth about Violet's paternity behind a veil of disdain. Thomas was paralyzed when he heard these words, a mixture of disbelief and pain as he realized that, for his father, this was nothing more than a strategic move. Desperation was taking over his mind, the future was crumbling before his eyes, and he needed to do something to protect Violet, but at what cost? That same night, Violet, devastated by the rumors circulating, decided it was time to leave. This world in which love was seen as a luxury to be eliminated was unbearable, and the weight of the legacy she never wanted to carry seemed to tear her apart. She wanted to escape, leave everything behind and find a new beginning somewhere else, far from the intrigues and illusions that surrounded her. Thomas, at the same time, received a disturbing call from his father, who threatened to ruin Violet's reputation if he didn't immediately marry Seo Hannah. That blackmail became a sword over his head, a moral dilemma that required a painful decision. In a moment of despair and love, Thomas realized he must do the impossible to protect Violet. That night, at a gala party where everyone was waiting to see the perfect future couple, Thomas made a decision that would tear his soul apart. With a fierce glare, he turned to Violet, making her feel every word like a sharp knife. He said that she was just an employee of the foundation, that their paths could not cross, that their love was just futility. Tears in Violet's eyes were a sea that Thomas fought not to sink, but he knew it was the only way to save her. The pain in both hearts manifested in silence, while their looks last crossed, marking the end of intense and forbidden love, now consumed by lies and betrayals. In the darkness of the following night, every step that Violet took away from Thomas separated her more from her heart, and their choice weighed in her souls like a scar. Thomas could not know if he would ever know if the words he gave were really true. However, the question that resonated in his mind was whether their love was strong enough to resist the weight of tradition and pain, or if they were bound to get lost forever. The next part 1 will show the development of the relationship between Thomas and Violet, alternating moments of sadness and hope, as well as the emotional challenges they face in the midst of this forced separation. Thomas Kong watched the dark rain that plummeted from the sky in Seoul, the drops beating the window of the Kong Group office as if reflected the storm that unfolded inside. In such a great house, where the weight of tradition and expectations seemed to echo with each step, Violet had always been a ray of light in the darkness. Who took his breath, now seemed to him a distant echo. Arrested in an arranged marriage that never asked, with Seo Hannah, daughter of the most influential politician in the country, whose life expectancy was just another buzz to the Korean society. He had made his choice, or rather, forced to make it. Meanwhile, somewhere in Europe, Violet Choi tried to gather the pieces of his life. The fresh and cold air in the European morning could not erase the memories, but offered temporary comfort. She had become a stronger woman, shaped by the pain of losing what she loved most, but the echoes of life she had left behind never abandoning her. The ceramic artifact that was restoring at the small art workshop in Milan remembered his old work at the Kong Foundation, where there were laughs, whispers, and promises whispered between her and Thomas. But now, every brushstroke on the broken surface was a reminder that the love they cultivated, strong like ceramic, had shattered. Determined to move on, Violet used to think that love was not worth the pain he carried, although his heart was still bleeding through the absence of the man he knew as the warmth of a bonfire on winter night. However, behind the doors of his married life, Thomas became more and more a shadow of what he used to be. Frustration grew more and more, while Seo Hannah was beginning to realize that Thomas would never love her, a conclusion that hit her like a bucket of cold water. The desire to control his life now consumed her, a relentless need to ensure that he was never really free. She watched from afar, with a cunning plan beginning to form in her mind. He had been the object of his obsession, and with Violet's memory always on his way, she began to think that destroying her was the only way to have Thomas completely for herself. Anger and revenge shielded her from any emotion other than the need to control the man that society expected to be perfect, but actually became increasingly lost in his own loneliness. Meanwhile, Violet, with his indomitable spirit, had set a new trajectory for his life, but the shadow of his past followed her, especially when a mysterious and ancient secret that involved the Kong family began to circulate in the media. The rumor that she could be Kang's illegitimate daughter quickly took shape and became increasingly difficult to ignore, spiraling in a cacophony cycle that threatened not only her new world, but also the emotional security she had just started building. The flap of his life became a scenario of chaos again, and the possibility of returning to Korea seemed increasingly inevitable, even if his heart knew that this return could mean a new wound. Now, with the ways of both intertwined by secrets and lies, the discussion about what they would do from there became more urgent than ever, and fate resonated on the uncertainty of their choices, while both wondered if love could even overcome the barriers that tradition and society imposed on it. In the next part, we will explore the introduction of emotional challenges or external conflicts that test the protagonists. Years passed since the last meeting of Thomas Kong and Violet Choi, and life had taken unexpected and painful directions for both. Thomas, now a 32-year-old man involved in his responsibilities and family demands, has become the figure who have always told him to be powerful, successful but insistently lonely. He saw himself stuck in a marriage arranged with Seo Hannah, a perfect candidate from the family point of view, but never managed to touch his heart. Meanwhile, Violet was returning to South Korea as a restorative of renowned art, his hands carving the essence of each support, while his heart remained in the shadow of the past. Both lived in parallel worlds, next to each other, but without touching, with the pain of separation still pulsating like an open scar in his soul. Violet, after his return, had prepared to avoid any contact with Thomas, knowing that his outcome looked like a book written by strength beyond their control, and in each gallery where he worked, the memories of his laughs and the hidden moments envisioned as paintings faded in the sunset, painfully beautiful, and could never be reignified. But the fate, always cunning, decided that the two could not escape each other forever. In one of his exhibitions, while adjusting a painting with a delicate touch, he felt a familiar presence behind him. Turning slowly, Violet's heart almost stopped by finding his eyes that never stopped loving. Thomas was there, and even wrapped in a perfectly carved suit, the expression on his face was from a man who had spent years immersed in doubt and unwilling longings. He had told her he saw her in an ad and started desperately looking for her. The intensity in his gaze showed that although the years have passed, the connection between them still vibrated like a stretched rope about to break. Although the little laughs between them were almost invisible, the silence carried a weight that they both knew it had to be faced. They were about to transform that tension into words, but a familiar voice broke the moment. Min Jun, Thomas's best friend and a constant ally in his life, approached an expression that mixed relief and a touch of concern. He had investigated the rumors that plagued their relationship years ago and whispered to Thomas that Violet was not the daughter of Thomas's father. The truth he slowly revealed unfolded like a new screen, painting possibilities where there was before despair and loneliness. Thomas needed to hear more. His voice trembled as he turned to Min Jun, wondering about the details, almost unable to believe that so many hallucinations and fears were shy about their innocent hearts for so long. Min Jun, taking a breath and looking into Thomas's eyes, said all the rumor was manufactured, a maneuver calculated by his family to prevent them from joining. Thus, the truth that should free them now find them in the hazy crossroads of repressed feelings and lost dreams. The revelation left Thomas stunned, full of a whirlwind of emotions, describing the pain he had lived in recent years as if he had walked through a scorching desert to find out that he was just a few steps from an oasis. He just wanted to run until Violet, explain everything and, perhaps, redeem the past that weighs on them as a shadow. And while the memories and nights in the clear floated back to Thomas's mind as sudden waves, he found himself oscillating between the euphoria of newly discovered freedom and the fear of reality breaking brutally in front of him. However, he would understand that the true battle would begin now, not only against the ghosts that separated them, but also against the resistance of his family and the world who had decided a destination before both were born. After this electrifying meeting, Thomas and Violet's life was about to be redefined, with each choice unfolded like a new brushstroke in a masterpiece, while they prepared to face the storm of feelings and challenges that would next. In the next part, we will explore the development of the relationship between the protagonists, where they will try to rebuild the confidence and ties they almost lost in the shift of the years and the lies. Inside a luxurious office at the top of the Kong Group, the wind whistled through the open windows, bringing a fresh air that contrasted with the heavy climate of tension. Thomas Kong faced his father, the austere figure who had been a synonym for his obligations. The room was immersed in a loaded silence, until Thomas, taking a deep breath, took courage to break the bonds of a life that did not choose. He said he could no longer live in the shadow of expectations that did not represent him. In revealing his decision to divorce Hannah, a cry of unbelief resonated through the room, but in his chest he felt a wave of freedom, as if a colossal weight had been removed. Meanwhile, outside, Violet Choi watched the city of Seoul with a rapid heart, attached to his most intimate memories of the moments he had shared with Thomas. She reflected on the confessions and promises that framed her love, remembering how much they had struggled to find hope amid chaos. With a reluctance tip and his heart weighing, Violet realized that his love for Thomas had never been erased. And so, on a night enlightened by the moon, he decides that he could not ignore the call of his soul. The fate guided them back to that little art gallery where it all started. Upon entering, the smell of fresh paint and the vibrant colors of the paintings around revived their deepest memories. It was there that Thomas and Violet met again, the eyes loaded with emotion, the silence full of everything that was not said. She said she had missed you, and that time without him was like a desert without water. Thomas's answer was a look that promised so much, an ancient devotion that was not extinguished, but was strengthened with the pain of separation. The tears mingled with his nervous laughter, and amid confessions, they drew a new beginning. When Thomas finally approached and hugged her softly, they could feel the intensity of the unbreakable connection. It was as if time had paused, allowing the hearts to dance together, ignoring the burdens of the past. In a moment of vulnerability, he whispered that he would never let the truth separate them again, and that together they would face any storm. Violet, his eyes shining, replied that his love for him was stronger than any shadow that dared to threaten his future. Thus, with exalted hearts surrounded by the magic of art they loved so much, they looked at each other and, after a long and time-consuming second that seemed to last eternity, the distance between them disappeared. The kiss that followed was the victory over all lies and fears, a sealing of commitment that promised eternal love. While the colors of the gallery seemed to vibrate more intensely around them, Thomas and Violet were ready to rebuild their lives, side by side. The new horizon was drawn ahead, full of possibilities and promises of a love that challenged even the limits of tradition and lies. In that beautiful night, they understood that the past could shape who they were, but would not define their future. Their love was the only truth that really mattered, and so, while the others left their destinations to find, they dared to go their own way together in this symphony called life. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like and subscribe to Happiness of Love. That way, you won't miss any of our heartfelt romances. See you in the next love story.